Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonsoir, bonsoir tout le monde. Merci, Irvin, pour concours banu. I'm Karen Richman, and I'm presenting with Stanley Mathurin. Our presentation describes how the members of a transnational community spread across the globe organize themselves through digital media, machines, and bodily muscle to bring light to their home anchor in Thirivière-les-Auganes. Within 2 years, members of Zone Palme Claire spread across Florida, New York, Morreale, France, Brazil, Chile, and beyond, together with their kin in Thirivière, collaborated to install solar-powered light to their entire area and to renovate its colonial-era irrigation system and pool. Aiming to make up for multilateral structural neglect, Zone Palme Claire intentionally targets environmental and social sustainability. Stanley Mathurin, the originator of Zone Palme Claire, will speak first. And then I, who lived with Stanley's family in Thirivière in the early 1980s, and I've been engaged with their long distance community ever since. Then I'll present next, putting Zone Palme Claire in the context of scholarship on migrants' remittances, translocal voluntary associations, hometown associations, as well as on new technologies of cross-border communication. So, Stanley.
Merci, merci Dr. Karine. Et m'a salué tout le monde qui branche ensemble avec nous et t'a suivre nous partout dans le monde là. Et merci, merci pour l'opportunité. Jeudi, nous là, on a parlé des organisations projet de développement de petites rivières et qui jeudi, tout le monde connaît spécialement dans la cour Haïti, sur nos zones Palme Claire. Et non, organisation ça, c'est projet de développement de petites rivières qui gagne la donne, qui gagne la donne projet ça, qui c'est zone Palme Claire. Nous avons plus que 2 ans, 2 ans et demi, et depuis nous travaillons dans l'organisation. L'organisation, ça a été pris naissance en Florida, 15 juin 2019. Dans ce moment-là, nous avons un pile projet et nous avons réalisé. Et dans tête ensemble, un pile membre dans la communauté, nous mettons ensemble côté nous travail pour nous changer petite rivière. En l'organisation, ça, nous avons plusieurs bagages nous basés sur eux. Une première bagage nous garder, c'est lumière nous gagner. C'est lampe qu'on a installé et nous avons éducation. Et nous avons regardé comment nous mettre main dans l'éducation. En pile petit monde qui peut aller à l'école dans la localité, comment nous supporter. Et sport. Et une tout changer petit les m'appeler dans la localité ça yo et gens de travail ça yo nous t'a fait ensemble côté Timon nous jouons pile football dans endroit ça et puis nous garder canalisation canal nous yo comment nous cap travailler pour nous cap nettoyer canal nous. Et puis tout pendant nous fait tout travail ça yo tout en organisation gagne un pile opportunité qui présente tête yo pour même t'a suivre ensemble avec nous cap garder photo yo. Il y a un pile opportunité qui présente tête. Je dis, il y a plusieurs les soldats sur panel zone Palme Claire tap travail c'est monde ça yo tap mettre main et tap fait travail ça yo nous même pendant nous même nous dans communauté diaspora et nous gagnons une communauté centrale dans la Koulakay nous tap exécuter ça et puis nous même n'a parlé ensemble avec eux pas seulement qui ça nous voulait faire en dans localité mais qui ça qui bon pour nous travailler ensemble pour nous cap faire. Et bon Joos, pendant plus que 2 ans ça nous avons installé plus que 300 lampes panneaux avec panneaux solaires de grande capacité et projet nous connaît table durée dans la localité yo. Et parfois tout gain pile monde n'a parlé les moun des projets ça yo comment vraiment nous réaliser projet ça yo. Je dis à nous gain pile monde j'aime commencer dire là nous gain pile monde et qui dans la communauté diaspora yo pas seulement monde qui dans la communauté diaspora yo mais monde qui en Haïti tout nous encourager monde ça yo participer il y a un pile monde en Haïti je dis à t'a bay 50 good par mois monde qui pas gain 50 good ça yo fait yo même yo Yo pote support pa yo vini parce que canal ça yo tout faut que nous nettoyer yo même genre pendant n'a parler là ou regarder photo ça yo t'a passé ou après poteau t'a bâti et moun ça yo en pile moun ça yo et qui campé t'a installé poteau ça yo pour nous et partout dans localité yo et travail ça et nous gain plus que 2 ans depuis n'a fait et dans moment là pendant nous gain fin installer plus que 300 lumières nous pas qu'on fin installer poteau nous gain plusieurs poteaux en pile moun gain dévouement qui t'a remet ouais yo gain un poteau devant la caillou n'a continué installer lumière. Et lumière ça yo tout yo pote en pile c'est yo pote sécurité yo changer communauté nous on a regardé communauté à Konya c'est une autre communauté 2 ans et demi de cela nous t'ai commencé bagay yo pas comme ça et je dis à nous gain vie nocturne et qui tourner en dans localité yo et je dis à parfois elle quand c'était 8h et nous kon gain moun yo soit fermer porte al dormir je dis à nous gain ti moun yo tourner dans la rue Konya courir le soir et nous gain grand moun yo qui chita devant la caillou et kounya ça mené communauté ça lever communauté à côté je dis en pile insécurité qu'on a ravagé le soir et nous pas vraiment gain ça encore et n'a continuer ensemble avec activité lumière nous yo et je dis à tout en pile jeune garçon dans la localité je dis à yo gon opportunité yo gen moyen même les je dis à moun ça yo pas toucher yo pas vraiment touché pour travailler ça yo mais en fin de journée parfois les travail comme ça nous aider dans activité manger yo même qui viennent investir temps ça dans la localité à nous aider pour yo cap manger mettre manger disponible pendant la journée et localité à libelle et je dis à en pile monde je dis à monde fier pour yo connaître son membre en zone pas clair. Et nous avons plusieurs ponts et me changer une pont à regarder là c'est un route nous qu'on fait un petit route ça me qu'on tomber sous lui en pile et c'est un bagage me toujours dans l'idée et me changer route ça il était tout petit on a passé sous bicyclette et plusieurs fois puis me glisser me tomber et je dis à pont ça nous avons réalisé pont ça et on regarder monsieur au tap travail et j'aime dire là monsieur ça c'est pas mon nous payer c'est en pile là dans youtube ouais tap travail là gagne by 50 gouttes et comme ça tout gagne pas gagne mais ça pas gagne yo met temps ça yo disponible et pour yo investir dans localité yo et pendant canal nous youtube nous nettoyer nous curer canal yo et parce que c'était un véritable problème lié dans localité yo les grands la pluie tomber et canal yo pas de fouiller de l'eau envahi tout côté je dis à canal yo nettoyer et canal yo curé et non pas seulement nettoyer canal yo en dans canal yo tout nous fait bel bassin soit regarder en bas là c'est une plus bel bassin nous dans la couleur regarde dans moment n'a parler là et place ça c'est une place historique place ça yo le lac li c'est la reine Anakaona et dans tant longtemps était qu'on baigne et son bel bassin je dis à ou regarder en pile monde vient dans endroit ça c'est un endroit touristique et nous avons un lieu côté gentil messieurs nous yo mesdames nous tout monde dans la localité au monde vient baigner son bel bagage je dis à tout le monde fier des endroits ça et nous continuons à travailler moi était quoi gain pile notre bagage n'a poussé pour nous faire dans endroit ça nous t'a même mettre toilettes nous t'a même faire restaurant une façon monde t'a sauter dans n'importe endroit arriver là ou à l'aise ou confortable et pendant nous t'a travail ça tout route nous yo une bagage nous réaliser pendant nous t'a installé lumière nous t'a fait un pile bagaille nous ouais route nous yo dans un état déplorable les canaux ça yo pas fouiller les de l'eau vini t'es gain pile labo je dis à ça nous fait route ça yo fait en température organisation nous gain investi nous gain un camion ça ali pour organisation camion ça nous fait avec nous botter remblai nous acheter remblai avec vinn vider dans route nous yo et puis nous louer agent lou ça yo ba nous pas vraiment connait non nous louer gros matériel agent lou ça yo et puis avec nous gailler remblai et nous compacter remblai et qu'on y a ou doit la pluie doit tomber fait quelques jours à tomber ou passer dans endroit ça yo ou à l'aise pour passer dans endroit ça yo route nous yo je dis avec à cause des organisations route nous yo non bon état et ça pas possible j'aime dire là avec sans diaspora nous yo on a parlé de diaspora on a parlé de tout le monde nous gagne aux États-Unis tout le monde nous gagne en France Canada Guadeloupe Chili Brésil tout le monde met main pour travailler ça capable possible et je dis nous gagnons l'autre rivière et nous gagnons l'autre croix de paix Ça, c'est en droit, et comme ça, on parle sous zone pas claire. Nous avons l'autre quoi de paix, nous avons l'autre corridor, nous avons l'autre plan, puis qu'on va paix qualité. Et moi, je crois, travail nous avons pour nous faire dans la localité, les seulement commencer. Et nous avancer, nous continuer à demander, nous continuer à parler ensemble avec nous, demander au support. Et il y a une bagaille tout, moun tap investi sous zone pas claire. Nous voyons engouement pour investir. Nous mettons les nous fait ou gon envie pour investir parce que chaque tarif où arrivé l'on investi dans zone pas claire nous gagnons non nous ba ouf l'on commencer arriver dans $500 ou son VIP ou son VIP silver l'on commencer arriver dans $1000 l'on avancer toujours son VIP gold tout tarif ou prend ou arriver son VIP soit regarder liste là ça c'est liste par jour combien monde t'a bay $10 monde t'a bay $5 $20 ça c'est l'argent par jour et une bagaille tout nous gain groupe WhatsApp ça tout ça ou investir dans l'organisation ou pour réussir ça à monter pour tout le monde dans la localité au capable ou pour un pile bois voto nous faut connaître merci pour $10 ça merci pour 50 gouttes soit en Haïti dans n'importe côté dans le monde là merci et c'est façon ça tout nous faut connaître $10 ou te voyer by organisation ou investir dans l'organisation nous recevoir n'importe l'argent ou investir dans l'organisation s'il pas monter ce groupe là pour tout le monde où l'argent ça c'est que nous même dans l'organisation nous pas recevoir l'argent ça et je dis à me content pour travail ça t'a fait dans rivière j'en fait dire là nous étions en pile l'autre travail pour nous faire toujours dans moment là n'a pensé de bibliothèque pour nous gagner dans la localité. Il y a une façon pour nous mettre le facile. Il y a un élève à l'école. L'élève s'il pas gagné un livre pour livre la cap disponible. Et puis on doit pour le chita pour le faire des voiles. Parce que moi, je crois éducation, c'est base. Éducation, c'est clé. Et je dis à tout le monde qu'on est en pile monde, plusieurs bagages n'a fait qui beaucoup là, mais tout le monde a un bagage cap faire dans la communauté. Il y a des gens qui ont fouillé tout, il y a des gens qui ont entré dans le canal. Tout le monde travaille ça, c'est pas nous mêmes diaspora qui fait, nous pas qu'à faire sans communauté, sans équipe centrale, sans équipe, sans monde dans la localité, on t'a mettre poteau ça, on t'a fait toute lumière ça, on t'a mettre au campé. Et sous panel zone pas me clairer tout. Les nous te fait qu'à plan ces mouvements, nous te dit je dis à nous mettons un panel campé. Mais je dis à nous pas seulement gagner un panel, ça c'est une communauté liée. Toute bagaille t'a passé en dans localité nous yo. C'est là nous parler sous panel zone pas me clairer. Et une te gon enterrement dernièrement quelques temps de cela et côté nous gagnons ancien parmi nous et qui était passé de la vie à la mort et nous avons plusieurs petites l'étape dans la communauté diaspora et qui pas de cas en Haïti c'est sous panel zone pas me clairer tout le monde était branché et tout le monde t'a regardé et ça c'était un bel moment. Puis en pile belle bagaille dans la localité yo toujours passé sur panel zone pas me clairer et là tout chaque matin tout le monde branché pour yo qui ça t'a passé la caille comment la caille et nous gain vidéo nous gain photo chaque jour t'a monter panel là et ça c'est un bon ami Steve qui était en Haïti qui était Chili et puis il était prend au Chili il était pour le venir aux États-Unis et avec support bon Dieu il était arrivé aux États-Unis et une première bagaille il était fait il était arrivé ouais communauté zone pas me clair aux États-Unis ça c'est maman avec papa et il était venu c'est comme ça tout le monde reconnaît c'est pas monde nous te connaît Haïti mais c'est sous zone pas me clair nous tout reconnaître et communauté ça c'est là li fondé je dis à me fier de ça fait là et pas quoi moi même seulement localité à content même toujours dire travail nous gain devant nous le plus toujours on nous soudé on nous continuer travailler ensemble et pour nous continuer à développer Rivière en mettant un impact dans le pays nous, qui c'est Haïti. Merci Dr. Karine, merci à tout le monde qui t'a suivi.
Thank you so much, Stanley. And I'd like to put some of what Stanley has said in anthropological and political economic context. Observers of HTA's hometown associations have often remarked on the phenomenal contributions of individual migrants and of HTA club members to their original communities in the forms of road building, water provision, education, clinics, church constructions, and beyond. They also note the multiple intractable structural limitations on the potential of these independent private voluntary associations, which often face anti-immigrant discrimination where they're based, to mitigate state neglect, especially of the people and infrastructure of rural localities and the disparities created and exploited by neoliberal approaches to development. Migrant producing states' weak support of HTAs notwithstanding, it's important to note that Mexico, one of the best studied cases of HTAs, has since 1990 formally recognized the transnational clubs. But the Haitian state, by contrast, has barely recognized the plethora of Haitian HTAs. The HTAs are therefore at a huge disadvantage because they're unlikely to get benefits from state alliances on either end in the form of either logistical support or breaks from fees and from taxes. In his 2006 study of Haitian HTAs in New York, Francois Pierre-Louis demonstrated the high level of ambivalence HTA members had toward the Haitian state. At the point of his study in the early 2000s, there were more than 40 HTAs in the network of the Federation of Regional Associations of Haitians Abroad. Pierre-Louis highlights how members of the second generation, the post-1980s HTAs, tended to be idealistic and nationalistic, but also apolitical and distrustful of the state, which they understandably regarded as corrupt and ineffectual. A subsequent study led by Patricia Weiss-Fagan praised the astonishing level of investment, agency, and creativity of the Haitian HTAs, despite their members' lack of formal training in the techniques and field of development. But these extraordinary efforts clearly cannot alone overcome the lack of serious development policy and practice that fails to reinforce state responsiveness and capacity. They further pointed out the common HTA pattern of going from one project to another without investing in how to sustain each one. For example, constructing school buildings and paying for tuition and uniforms rather than teacher training. Of course, as the researchers admitted, the same critique could be launched of much better funded NGOs in the quintessential republic of NGOs, whose go-it-alone approach to development, reduplication of state programs, and utter lack of accountability undermine the Haitian state. Zone Pomme Claire's initiative in 2019 to light up their home is actually an indirect critique of the state's incompetence and, by contrast, a confident declaration of their own competence, which emphasizes self-help, voluntarism, service, and technology. The group's declaration of their agency to take the matter into their own hands, as opposed to depending on outsiders like beggars asking for charity, echoes the views of urban young men described, for example, in Chelsea Kivlin's ethnography. Lighting up the village might have been the original goal, but the production of collective solidarity seems to have been an important result. The multiplier effects of Zone Pomme Claire's collective transborder collaboration echoes the trajectory of material and social achievement described by Xochitl Bada in her ethnography of Michoacan HTAs in Chicago. Bada's observations apply so well to Zone Pomme Claire, as she describes the members consciously practice transparency to see and treat one another as agents of social accountability. They deployed their substantial capacity for self-representation and promotion, and they recognized that they had to operate flexibly across scales and spaces. Each of these factors propelling the Michoacan story is readily apparent in Stanley's recollection of the beginnings and the work of Zone Pomme Claire. Stanley had observed how migrant groups were frustrated to develop their home, and he had an understanding of what types of mistakes had to be avoided. Among these problems were financial limitations, as Stanley describes, individual egotism, and a lack of tête ensemble. Having only one project, stopping after completing it, and above all, being limited in focus on members settled in one particular diaspora location. Their locally grounded networks provided support and solidarity, but they also made the clubs less flexible and unable to handle the scale of their long distance community. By 2017, Stanley understood that they could transcend these obstacles if they adopted two brand new communication technologies operating on smartphones: the encrypted chat and social media platform, WhatsApp, and online banking. WhatsApp is far more than a personal messaging system. It is, according to Gomez Cruz and Harinandrath, a collective tool for production and extension of flexible networks of trust rooted in kinship, communities, histories, and societies, ubiquitous and well-nigh inescapable in the everyday life of transnational Haitian society. WhatsApp is now a technology of life. WhatsApp offered the collective tool that enabled Zone Pomme Claire to operate as a flexible, mobile, transnational, modern, reachable network, reaching people wherever they resided. And the community membership, which is now close to 300, is organized, as Stanley mentioned, across places. There's a leading council with members from both at home in Tirivia and in every major place where members of the diaspora reside. And you saw in the images that how the WhatsApp chat posting works. The invoices of the contributions are posted regularly on the encrypted WhatsApp chat, a visibility that garners trust in the process and in the members of the group. The posting of each contribution is done to provide evidence that further inspires trust. At the opposite end, there are daily videos of about 90 seconds, because they're limited by the chat, narrated in the deep baritone voice of a member of the community who happens to be a professional radio host. And he shows the work daily as it's being done. Patrick greets the audience at the opening of each video saying, Zone Pomme Claire, Zone Pomme Claire, Zone Pomme Claire. And then he shows what's going on and describes who's doing it and how they're doing it. And there are now thousands, literally, of videos of people digging canals and tractors moving the earth, like the still images that you saw in the PowerPoint. Another aspect that Stanley mentioned is that the chat's organized to build individual reputation. They encourage individual competition by listing dollar amounts of the individual donor and classifying donors by rank and creating statuses like VIP gold. And as Stanley says, the competition is intended in a positive way to promote engagement, generosity, and pride. Zone Pomme Claire creates its community through a unique style of intense, hyperactive, linguistic, graphic, and musical expression on the digital platform. It's multilingual in text using English, French, and Creole. I haven't seen Spanish yet, despite so many members living now in Chile. And as you saw, they're repeating lines of little emoji of clasped hands in ebullient applause that commend each donor for each monetary contribution. And when I first joined, I said, are these hands clapping or are they, bat bravo, or are they praying? And they seem to be doing both. And so it's important to mention that there's a very fluid boundary in this communal project across Christian and Vodou practices. Bonje is constantly being invoked and is ubiquitous in the chats and graphics. And the cheerful affirmative discourse of the group especially echoes the exuberant, positive, confident Christian sensibility of an increasing majority of the people of transnational Tirivia. Nonetheless, the group's leaders have consciously avoided drawing attention to the divisions between Protestants, Catholics, and Vaudouisans. Stanley, who is himself a very gifted orator and has preached at his church occasionally in the absence of the minister, himself posts very stirring motivational speeches at major milestone events like New Year's and upon the completion of important project phases. There's also YouTube postings because of the limitations of the Zone Pomme Claire app. And to conclude, we'd like to just reflect on the name of the organization. So, to light is claire, not Creole, and it also invokes éclairer, which means to enlighten. So when I first thought about claire, I asked Stanley if he was familiar with the proverb "Chaque coucou éclairé pour Gélie," every firefly lights for its own eyes. Now that proverb, you know that proverbs are used to teach morality and to discipline antisocial behavior. And that proverb actually is about, it's a critique of individual self-reliance because it says the firefly is lighting for only its own eyes. But actually what Zone Pompe Claire has shown is that they light for everyone. And it's a major accomplishment in the organization of solidarity in this enormous tête ensemble, this enormous expression of community. And the other notion is éclairé. Zone Pompe Claire makes us think about éclairé. And in the old context, éclairé really signified going to school, right? As opposed to the education you could learn sitting at your elder's knee speaking in Creole. Éclairé really connoted French education in an institution. And it's important to recognize the way that Zone Pompe Claire has realized the importance of education. And it's in keeping with that their next project happens to be the construction of a school full of books and computers. And so through their multi-scalar, fluid, long-distance agency, the members of this community have lit up their home, independent of the state and of development agencies. Their success is a source and a mirror of great pride and internal trust, but at the same time, an effect of the relentless immiseration of their home anchor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. And I believe next we have Gloria Blaise. Whenever you're ready, feel free to begin.
Let me know which screen you all see. You seeing the PowerPoint over here, or are you seeing my regular desktop?
I see your desktop.
Okay. So, what do you all see now? Presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Blaise. I am a fourth-year MS-PhD student at Cornell University, and I was born in Haiti, in Kafou specifically. Boucher was where I grew up for a bit. I came to the States when I was 5 in 2000. You can guess my age now, and I've since been here in New York, and I have the opportunity to share my research today with you all, which is titled here, Rural Network Ties, Mapping the Spread of Community-Based Agroforestry in the Latibonit region of Haiti. This is a part of my master's program that I completed last year, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with you all today. Below are the actual collaborators and funders of this project, and the names below mine are members of my committee. And so, yeah, if anyone here is familiar with the country of Haiti, then it's likely that you have come across some type of headline referring to the state of the country's natural resources, specifically its trees and forests. And so as you come across these headlines, I want you all to consider the term tree cover and forest cover, because they are different. Forest cover refers to the actual patches of forest that are greater in whatever area and density, whereas trees outside of forest are considered tree cover. And there's a specific definition for that. But I just want you all to consider those terms as they tend to be used interchangeably, which is incorrect. The country in terms of tree cover has about 30% in tree cover, and 2%, the 2% number comes from the virgin forests that are no longer around. But despite that, one second, let me put these blinds down. Sorry, excuse my home office outfit. But despite that, right? If you have been to Haiti, you have seen any great images, hopefully in the media, I just want to plug it in here that despite the country being labeled poor by whoever's definition, the country is full of rich history, resources, a great culture, and great people. But jumping right into the study area, this is what a typical hillside in the study area that I studied in looks like. As you can see, it's really bare, right? Bare and in critical need of restoration. And so agroforestry, which is the intentional combination or integration of trees into agricultural systems, is not new to Haiti. Haitians practice some form of it in their Jardin Lacou all across the country. But in terms of actual programs and projects that have been implemented in the country, several agencies and ONGs, NGOs have been implementing this practice throughout the country for decades. And this table here just shows a list of the more common ones that folks know are aware of. And the asterisk is one that I'm going to be focus on in this particular presentation. And to the right are just some images, some articles about programs in Haiti. And so the Haiti Timber Reintroduction Program, this is going to be the program of focus for this presentation. It's a community-based educational agroforestry program implemented by an NGO operating in the Veretz area of Latibonit. The actual organization, Haiti Friends, is based in Pittsburgh, but they've started off as a partner organization of the hospital before branching out on their own. And so this program has been established since 2005. It began implementation in 2006. And the program pretty much seeks to try to implement a proactive approach to addressing human well-being, but also natural resource degradation or land degradation in this area of Latibonit. And since their inception, they've worked with over 10,000 community members in over 70 plus communities. And so the hospital that they do partner with is Hospital Allred Schweitzer. I'm sure if you've been in that area, you've heard of that hospital before. They are, I think they're private, but they've been running for over 65 years. And so just keep that in mind for this presentation. And so jumping into the actual research, this is a framework that I use to conduct the overall master's, but the eco-agriculture framework, which has been developed by numerous partners, especially one of my committee members now. And the overall idea of the framework is to improve rural human livelihoods. And we explore the specific outcomes of this framework by using the H-trip intervention and as it related to agroforestry. And specifically, we looked at land cover and livelihood outcomes. And so why I chose this particular framework, and the part of the framework that I specifically focused on, was using local level evaluations as a means to better manage or better inform landscape level management practices. And so this particular study looks at the community level outcomes. And in addition to that framework, a part of that framework tries to develop indicators or provide indicators for livelihood. While we use the livelihood capitals, which is a community capitals framework, while it's not explicitly addressed or mentioned in this framework, it is very related to the sustainable livelihoods framework, which also uses capitals as a means to indicate or measure livelihood in communities. And what I mean by capitals or livelihood capitals, these are the stocks of resources that are available for communities to utilize to actually build their livelihoods. So in the case of social capital, we look at relations of trust and reciprocity between people. Natural capital includes all of the natural resources, sites, which include rivers, forests, state parks, if there are any where these folks are. And also human capital includes the skills and capabilities that allow them to make a living and strengthen their communities. And there were 3 research questions, but 2 major research questions that I'm going to discuss here for this presentation. And that is, what role do social networks play in driving agroforestry adoption? And below that, what livelihood benefits influence the spread of adoption? And secondly, what are the trends and patterns of changes in tree cover and agroforestry practicing communities? To your right, what you see is the actual study area. So we have the map of Haiti. We circle around the actual 3, 4, 5 communes that we use for the actual study. And the red dots indicate communities that are not in the program, and the green indicate the communities that are in the program. Well, I must note there are, of course, limitations to doing a sampling strategy like this that chooses enrollment and non-enrollment as a means to compare. But this study did not try to establish causality, but more so trying to find associations between communities practicing at XYZ level of agroforestry implementation with assistance from an NGO that has inputs that other communities that are probably practicing agroforestry, but not at the scale of what an NGO can help them do or enhance capabilities to do so. And we use the age strip as a case study for community-based agroforestry. And here are the methods. It was a pretty mixed method study. And so for the first questions, or the first set of questions, we used 12 communities, and a mixture of social network analysis and semi-structured interviews made up the bulk of the data. And then we also had focus groups within certain communities that we chose based on their experience with the program, how long they've been practicing it, but also with the communities that had never been involved in the program. And as for the tree cover change / land cover change, we had a sample of 60 communities, 30 of them from H-Trip, 30 from non-H-Trip communities. And we just looked at percent tree cover and changes in loss and gain of tree cover data. And this was mostly conducted with Google Earth Pro and QGIS. And jumping right into the results, right? One of the questions asks, what role do social networks play in agroforestry adoption? And within the entire study area, we found that there were various recruiting methods that the NGO used, and the diverse set of networks, which included the hospital and the hospital's sister clinics or mobile clinics that were present in the area. And of course, the NGO themselves proactively looked for communities in the area that they would actually go out right around the communes and find people, enter communities, speak to the leaders to try to spread awareness of the potential program that could fit the community's needs. And the figure on the right illustrates the ways that some of the communities were recruited. And there are different colors here. And so there were instances of communities being referred by nearby and even far communities. And keep that in mind that the topography in this area is very hilly. So for a community to be, let's say, 10 kilometers away and, however distance that is, I'm not sure what the actual distance of that is, but just keep in mind that hillsides are hard to go up and down. Those take time and effort. And so to see a community that's not near another community adopt by way of that other community is quite interesting to see. And so yeah, focusing more on the figure, there are 3 colors, and you see the hospitals at the center, and the actual office for the NGO is located in the hospital's campus. And so what you see is the red lines indicate the communities where the hospital already had presence in terms of community development for water efforts, or other mobile clinics where they had presence in. So the NGO leveraged that network to gain access to those communities. The green ones indicate where the actual NGO went in themselves and spoke to the leaders and recruited people. And then the cyan represent the connections or referrals that were made by participants in communities that then shared with another one. And these are just confirmed ones. I did not get a chance to interview every single community to see how they were referred, but it's very likely that a number of other communities were recruited by way of other communities involved. And the table to the left just shows the recruitment methods that the interviewees mentioned. And so as you see here, the community leader is the champion of adoption here. That's the person that's driving adoption within the communities. That's who most people trust within their community. So definitely keep that in mind as far as the outcomes of this study. And just so there's a quote below here, the leader is the one that got me involved. Whatever he says is good, I will get involved without a doubt. Just that's what I mean by the community leaders being champions. And further looking at networks, we conducted a social network analysis where pretty much based on distance and the number of connections that we identified through the participants, we ran 2 different analyses that tried to look at what communities are most influential and what communities have like the most influence. And so each red dot here indicates a physical location of a community in the outline area of the map above. And each arrow represents a connection between communities. The thicker the arrow, the thicker the line is, the more connections we identified through the participants. And table 3 here shows the summary of the social network analysis of the total number of ties, percent degree centrality, and percent information centrality. So degree centrality measured actor activity. In this case, the more connections we identified in a community that it had with other communities, the more active it was in the network. And among the sample communities, there were a couple that were central to the network. And information centrality predicted how information might flow through different paths, or in essence, connections between the community members. And this was based on a number of ties, their strength and their distance. So what we found was the longer standing communities that were clustered near other communities, of course, played a very important role in the spread, and that there were certain communities that were very influential. And of course, this was also the long-standing communities that had been there from the very beginning, that had a chance to be in the program every year. If I didn't mention earlier, but the way the program works is every year within the same communities, they have a new cohort of participants that they spend 9 months learning the agroforestry system, how to enhance what they already are doing or build on what Haitians already know how to do pretty well, right? And so we can imagine that communities that have been involved for a long time have a greater network of people that they know, but also more influence on the actual network of program participants and program communities. And this quote here just pretty much illustrates what I mean by that. And so one community leader says, before you would have people in different communes not know about each other. But now through this network that H-Trip helped them establish, through the leaders that they help train and build capacity to lead, hundreds of people are now connected. Everyone is helping each other do research, and they're also sharing seeds. So that's also increasing biodiversity in communities that don't have access to certain seeds to plant certain trees. And I assume that's also the case for certain crops, right? And so moving on to the livelihood benefits. So, right, we now know that this program is spreading, people are making recommendations, referrals, but what's actually happening on ground, right? So one of the things that we looked at was first of all, what's driving people's adoption behavior? And what we found were three of the main ones was access to trees, obvious, right? We want trees, Haitians love trees. We use that to, build our livelihoods. And ecosystem services, which include stabilizing the soil, providing shade. We know how important shade is in places like Haiti. You will stand under a tree while waiting for something or just having a chat with your friend. You need to be under a tree for the most part, if you're in a rural area at least. I guess in urban areas, probably under a balcony somewhere. But also increasing food sources. Food security is a problem in Haiti, and that's another dimension that I'm exploring now further on in my PhD research. But these were the three main drivers of adoption, and this is because those members or those early adopters were able to demonstrate or be like the guinea pigs of the program. And once people saw that happening, these drivers became even more important further along. And below is just a quote about how someone used the trees or was aware of how the trees helped with their soil erosion or reduce soil erosion, and just indicating that the ecosystem services to him or to her was the most important reason why they wanted to stay in the program, adopt the practice at the capacity that H-Trip was teaching. And I just want to indicate here, this is not, this table here presents a summary of the capitals. So with the mixed methods, you apply code and then you apply a weight, and that it gives you a way to pretty much have an overview of the patterns and trends in people's opinions and statements. And so throughout the interviews, we coded each statement for specific capitals. And so what this table shows here is the average weights of each capital. What I did here was I compared 2 communities with 2 other communities. So a total of 4 communities were used for this. This is not the sampling that I showed earlier, but I just want to focus on this particular one because this table is a part of a manuscript that has been accepted and is currently in press at the moment. But it does it does show that there are certain capitals that this practice, once established in a community over time, does help to build. So when compared with communities that we match by broad characteristics, again, we're not trying to establish causality here, but when we compare the communities, we saw differences in certain capitals, especially social, human, and cultural, and also financial. So just keep that in mind, and we hope to further make this study more robust and more rigorous in hopes of trying to establish these associations between this practice and, of course, the social dimensions of communities doing it together. And again, these are just some quotes here from the participants. So I'll give a brief moment for you all to read through them. But these additional statements just describe how having a greater presence of trees helped them address immediate needs. Immediate needs means sending their kids to school, going to the market, getting food. Let's say you don't have enough of a food group on your land from your crops. You could, sell something, whether it be some charcoal that you know how to produce better now because the organization taught you how to prune and use those, but also not go for the roots, I mean, the trunks of the tree. So you're able to now go down to the market and get something that you probably don't have access to, right? And also health needs. Someone specifically said that the tree stand that he grew with age trip assistance is what helped him go to the hospital and be able to afford treatment. And just the idea that people are now able to better manage their trees without completely depleting their resources there. And looking at tree cover now, this was the last component, we tried to see, okay, well, we know what's going on with livelihood, but what's another dimension of livelihood, which is your environment around you. So how it has tree cover, which is, one of the objectives was to increase tree cover as a means to enhance livelihood, because trees are livelihood in Haiti. And so what we attempted to do here was to analyze satellite imagery of 60 communities to gain a better understanding of the changes in land cover. And we used communities with at least 10 years experience practicing agroforestry, since trees do take a while to reach maturity, depending on the species. And so what we did were we used 3 time periods as an indicator of time over time. And so we used grid cell overlays to rate each cell. To the right, you see the actual example of a cell and what tree cover might look like, whether it's bare or dense. So as you can see here, we have a rating criteria. And below that is you see a table of the actual values. And so the 2 sets of communities, the 2 groups, were initially, of course, they started off different in some way. But over time, as you can see, the comparison, we see that there has been an increase in that difference. So in 2002, they were dissimilar in ways, but average percent by 2020 was 48% more in agroforestry communities and non-agroforestry communities. And another way to also track these patterns and trends was to use secondary data from the global GLAD lab, Global Land Analysis Discovery Lab. I think that's the name of the actual acronym. But what we did was we used their data to count how many pixels of trees were gained or lost within these communities. And by their means, tree cover meant actual tree stand that was at least 5 meters or taller. And so this data set indicated where losses happen and where gains happen. What we did was in QGIS, we ran a function or analysis that counted how many cells, and the output looked like what's on the right there. So it pretty much counts each cell within each community. And then we use Excel to compare the actual numbers. And using a Mann-Whitney U test, what we found was there were differences in gains, not so much losses. So what we see here are the left side is the adopting communities and the right side are non-adopting. And what you see is there are more gains in the adopting communities, which is the first line. And below, we see more losses in the non-adopting community. Now, of course, the only significant one here would probably be the gains, but this just shows the patterns. Like it seems as if tree cover is, of course, being diminished because trees are a livelihood. People are going to continue to harvest them to meet their livelihood needs. But it seems as if with the introduction of a program like this, gains are more likely, but also people are perhaps better managing their resources. But these communities, the comparison communities were chosen at random. I didn't actually visit them, so there's no way to verify. There are, of course, things that might confound this, that being there might be an actual program there, or people there are just not as trusting. So there are a number of variables that could have impacted these results, but this is just to provide a higher level view of like what could potentially happen in communities that are involved. And so moving on to the conclusions. So what I find is networks play an important role in diffusion and spread of an intervention. I think earlier, Karen mentioned trust in networks. It's critical, especially in the absence of a government that's actually functioning, right? And folks are used to a number of NGOs. There are literally a ton of NGOs in Haiti. So just having that it has trust already in it and leverage that clearly plays a role in that. And of course, the networks of the rural pays, they somehow, regardless of topography, have these connections. And there were some positive effects on tree cover. And while both groups experienced more losses than gains, in adopting communities, they were able to better manage their resources, as I mentioned earlier, without completely depleting them. And so as for recommendations, as I just mentioned, leverage those networks that already have some trust built into them. I think the special case here with this program is it's a hospital. We know how critical the hospitals are in Haiti, especially since access to health is so limited for a number of people. And so that hospital was trusted. They provided a service in the region. It made it easy for this organization to get in communities and establish trust and build that trust through their own program. And we know people that are experiencing poverty are going to share opportunities with each other that help them escape poverty. For as long as the program is contextually relevant and actually is designed to be context specific, I think people will always try to spread intervention. And the way diffusion works is initially you'll have some people that are reluctant or people that are very excited, and you'll see in the beginning it might be slow, but then it hops up. The diffusion is really, really quick, and then it just stagnates. And when it stagnates, you just assume that perhaps the members themselves would just spread it amongst themselves. And building social capital should be a priority, especially as mentioned earlier, in the absence of a functioning government. Getting people to trust each other, really try to approach their problems at a community level is one way to try to develop Haiti. I mean, very broad statement here, but community level efforts seem to be very successful. And those could be scaled up with the right funding and policy environment once things actually get better in terms of policy and stuff in Haiti. And so maintaining presence in communities as a program, definitely maintaining presence every year keeps enhances the likelihood of sustainability. I think that's a really critical component of this program. And to close off next steps, we have secured a pretty good grant to carry out research for the next 3 or so years. And so the idea here is to build a model for a planetary health community-centered, community-centered model for agroforestry prioritization or implementation across the rural landscape. And so if you do want additional details on the livelihood outcomes of this study, the paper will be published soon. But other than that, thank you. I hope I didn't speak too fast. I'm just trying to respect the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. I loved your presentation. Last but not least, we have Mr. Vincent.
Bonsoir tout le monde. So I'm going to talk about Martissant. I did my research there. I mean, it ended in March 2019 because, as you know, there are so many problems over there. And I'm not really talking too much about what is going on presently. You have seen that this summer, hundreds of families have been displaced by gang activity. But more or less my paper, we'll talk about what happened there before then. So I will share my screen. All right. So on a Sunday afternoon in February 2014, my friend Cornell took me on a long ride to see the neighborhood where he had lived all his life. Martissant is a hilly and dense part of the southwestern end of the capital that has recently been in the news for the gang activities that forced thousands of people out of their homes. We drove around the Martissant Park, the one that you can see in the photo here. This is the botanical garden. We drove around the Martissant Park, a 42-acre urban forest that was recently fenced and that is now administered as a public park by the Haitian NGO Focal. We had pointed out the many tall trees surrounding us and then stopped by a gate, as he said, quote, "They are building a library and a garden here. I never thought we would have a library in this neighborhood," end quote. He then drove down the street to the newly inaugurated Notre Jean-Baptiste Square. The small park surrounded by palm trees provides much needed public space in a very dense part of Martissant. As we walked along this edge, Cornell said, "Do you notice something? There's no trash. That's one of the good things the new park brought here. People have access to trash collection. The ravines are functioning and clean. The whole neighborhood looks clean." Less than a half mile away from here, it's completely different, like day and night. Just next to Martissant, people swim in trash. Mon nage n'en fatra. It's true. If you have a big rain during the night, you will wake up with tall piles of trash right in front of your door, even if you keep your corner of the street clean, end quote. Later, Winnell praised Focal because they preserved the park and renovated the neighborhood starting in 2007. Quote, everyone knows Focal in Port-au-Prince. It was a surprise when they started the projects in Martissant. I didn't know they did this kind of thing. For the past few years, they have saving a big chunk of forest. Without them, people would have built houses in the forest after the earthquake. If you walk up the hills, you will also see that they cleaned the ravines, built roads and bridges, end quote. This paper briefly looks at the work the Haitian-led NGO Focal has done to renovate the Martissant neighborhood and how it engaged people living there in its urban planning projects. While urban renewal projects improve quality of life for many and activated state-citizen relationships, these projects, I argue, do not bring stability on the long term because of their limited geography and timeframes. I will expand on these ideas later on. So key aspects of focal efforts to transform the physical landscape of Martissant, including protecting the springs, reconstructing ravines, and preserving a park. Many people agreed that preserving the urban forest and opening a public park were excellent moves, but they disagreed with project priorities. For a majority of people involved in these discussions, repairing mountain roads damaged by powerful storms was the priority. The dissonance unfolded in the streets of Martissant. People opposed canal rehabilitation during meetings and pushed hard for road repairs. This debate even took place on the walls of the neighborhood through graffiti, as you can see here. After weeks of dialogue, Focal and local organizations finally reached an agreement. Both roads and ravines would be rebuilt at the same time. This is an important moment. Participation is here turned upside down. Usually, the language of participation figures in all NGOs projects. Everyone is crafting participative projects. However, here, it is the people of Martissant who decided if a major NGO could work in its neighborhood or not. They managed to impose the priorities and had their roads built and or repaired. These, in turn, ensured the real participation of the people in Martissant in other crucial projects, such as water and woodland preservation. From 2007 to 2018, Focal and its partners really improved the infrastructures of the neighborhood. The Martissant Park is truly a beacon of hope in a city almost devoid of public spaces. Yet instability remained. Winnell and his wife Soraya continued to warn me that urban renewal alone would not ensure community security. Soraya echoed many of my friends from low-income areas when she said, quote, without judges we can trust, without a tribunal that can render justice, we will not move forward. Nos pas qu'un juge, nos pas qu'un tribunal qui t'abandonne justice, nos pas qu'avancer, end quote. As an astute observer, she knew that NGOs could not render the justice for which she longed for. Only a stable Haitian state could rebuild an enduring judicial system in the country. Winnell and Soraya understood that saving the Martissant springs and the forest was a crucial communal task, but the priority for the last 20 years remained consistent: security and stability. Beyond creating viable infrastructures, as Focal employees told me many times, the organization had the goal of creating stability. Actually, you had many NGOs that were involved in peacekeeping operations, more or less. So Focal wanted to reinforce citizenship by fostering dialogue and cooperation between locals and state service providers. They worked to establish what the geographer Charlotte Lemansky calls infrastructural citizenships, meaning the establishment of concrete material connections between people and state institutions, or citizenship built through action and construction in this case. However, enduring disparity between the goals of citizens and institutions continues to create a sense of instability among many project recipients in Martissant. The Martissant rehabilitation process is limited in space and time and embodies the problems of the projectorate model, such as demand from funding institutions for short-term results, dwindling funds from in the middle of projects. For instance, the European Union was funding the rehabilitation of a ravine a few years ago, 10 years ago, and they just cut the budget in the middle of the project. And that happens a lot, not only with NGOs, but with international institutions, sorry. Even under major constraints, focal members use their diplomatic talents to effectively manage and coordinate many distinct projects under the umbrella of a flexible, participatory, and holistic urban renovation plan. As a result, changes in the neighborhood are notable. Sidewalks, staircases, and bridges allow people to walk around ravines and to create new meeting spaces in densely built areas. However, as I said before, security problems persist, despite the connections creating between people through neighborhood projects and the multi-year efforts of the NGO conflict worldwide to build peace in the area. As one focal employee told me, quote, "The NGO concerned worldwide and many other organizations worked on the income problem. People who are in deep poverty have sometimes no choice but to join a gang. But no one is able to offer mass employment to fix the mass employment crisis," end quote. Like many other people who spoke with me, this focal employee believed that efforts to increase quality of life in a neighborhood will fall short without a proper justice system, a trained police force people could trust, and the availability of work. So I will talk about what I think are the crucial problems with this project. Because Focal receives funding from international institutions, such as the European Union or the French Development Agency, just to name a few. And because it partners with NGOs and state institutions, its effort to coordinate institutional goals with the needs and desires of people from Martissant have been difficult. Notably, new lines of fragmentation between neighborhoods have emerged because NGOs and state institutions often use accountability systems that privilege visible outcomes, such as building a new school. For instance, Soraya said her friends who live farther from the renovated ravines felt no major life improvements, which fueled acrimonious debates. It's not everyone in a Martissant neighborhood who's benefiting from the renovations. There are whole areas. It's a huge neighborhood, about 400,000 people. There are whole areas that Focal could not touch, actually. So it's creating fragmentation between different neighborhoods within Martissant. Further, the capital's many urban renewal and reconstruction processes form a projectorate, a social organization shaped by the temporality and geographical limits of projects that create new hierarchies of recipients while reinforcing the dominance of internationally funded groups. As other scholars have noted, NGO projectorates lead to urban dissonance by increasing inequalities within and between neighborhoods while undermining the state's capacity to intervene in the public sector. It's important to note that Focal is led by Haitian women, Michel Pierre-Louis, who was the former minister, for instance. So Focal is led by women who have governmental experience. It's a hybrid organization that operates as both an NGO and as a governmental actor. Focal is different from the majority of NGOs as it tries relentlessly to build state capacity. However, the projectorate model of NGOs limits their action in time and space. In terms of space, I come back to the beginning of the paper. Whitnell, my friend, mentioned that Martissant was clean, while Bolos, for instance, the adjacent neighborhood, was filled up with trash. Again, this fueled disparities between neighborhoods. On the south side of Route des Dalles, we have a clean and renovated neighborhood. On the other side of Route des Dalles, you just have to cross the street. We are in, that would be Bolos 4e Avenue. We have a place that has been completely abandoned by the state. This is where you have the Ravine Bois-de-Chêne, that is well known for being overflowed with styrofoam containers. And this is a place that is never cleaned up by the state or by anyone for that matter. So not surprisingly, it is in these areas, Bolos, Village de Dieu, where violent gang activity resurfaced after the collapse of Jovenel Moïse government in July 2018. And it's a short talk. I am almost done, but we can talk about the gang activity. There was a change there. I believe starting in 2018, that's what my friends are talking about. I'm talking about gangs, and I'm not talking about bats. There was a switch, according to Whitnell, for instance. The new gangs that appeared in Village de Dieu, Carrefour-Feuille, Martissant do not function as bats. The neighborhood organization, many run by young men. Chelsea Cleveland has an excellent ethnography, Street Sovereigns, about it. So that's something that we could talk about here. Because presently Martissant is dealing with gang activity. So strong dissonances exist between the short-term needs and desires of local populations and the long-term goals of institutions that prioritize building collective structures. Moreover, people who participate in urban renewal projects face many problems. They are often perceived as recipients of state favors, which can create new forms of hierarchies. In addition, the possibility of broad action in a neighborhood is undermined when too many actors exist. They have oftentimes dissonant goals, time horizons, and spatial visions, and only state action can unify them. Simply put, the Martissant urban planning project should not be a project, but a policy model for the reconstruction of the city as a whole. Again, bodies of laws exist, construction codes exist, and the state, in this case, and I can talk about it later on too, demonstrated its capacity to act in a beneficial fashion. The elements for rebuilding an inclusive and functioning city are here. To activate these elements, as Soraya, my friend, often points out, the state needs to be rebuilt. And that will mean abandoning austerity politics. Not abandoning austerity politics by pouring money in the state coffers. We know what happened with the Petro-Caribe funds, for instance, but investing in infrastructural citizenship. Or in other words, rebuilding the state from the bottom up by establishing connections between citizens and state institutions through the creation of services and infrastructure. But this time, not at the neighborhood level, but really at the country level. I'm done with the talk, and I do hope we have some time for a Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. I'm going to open the floor for the audience. If they have any questions to ask the panelists, feel free. We are running a little short on time, probably about like 8 minutes left. But if anybody doesn't have any questions, I'll end the session. So if anyone has any questions to ask, feel free.
If there aren't any questions from the audience, I would like to ask you, Vincent, I mean, how are things operating now? I might have missed it, but how are things operating now that, of course, things are actually in the headlines now, but how are things operating now with the org? And I guess what are the ways that community members involved in this project are trying to still make things work? I'm not sure to what level they're impacted by the gang activity, but how are they still trying to make things work despite the issues?
Sorry, Gloria, that was a question for me?
Yeah. Sorry, I was asking about how are, I'm not sure how to what level that particular community that the program works with is impacted by gangs or how close they are to the gang activity. But I'm wondering, how are the community members still trying to make things work or maintain the same activities of the program despite
Yes.
the recent really high spike in that gang activity?
It's a complicated question because things have evolved. I would say that before 2018, you had some kind of a truce between so-called gangs, and that was established by Focal. So Focal was fully able to open the Parc Martissant. Many people were going there without any troubles. I would say that from 2008 to 2018, you didn't have much gang activity in Martissant. It's actually quite a pleasant neighborhood because of the forest in the middle of it. So the botanical park, the botanical garden, the library, I believe, are still open. But the change that we had is that the bars, they partnered with, are not the ones that are fueling gang activity right now. We have new groups, new gangs. I was talking about 2018. This is when it started actually for my friends. They had to move out of Martissant. Not because of gang activity in Martissant, but because their daughter, who lives in Carrefourfeuille, could not live there anymore. That was Base TG. That was one of those new gangs. So Whitnell explained it as this, that those new gangs do not function as Base at all, meaning that they are not involved in the community. They are not doing any kinds of projects. I'm not saying that they are not political, but it's more being engaged into a form of necropolitics, if you wish. So what is going on in Martissant right now? Well, most of people from Focal cannot go to work. It's very difficult to go through Martissant. It's been maybe a couple of weeks that you cannot go south without encountering some kind of blockade. And since this summer as well, we have hundreds of families that have moved away from Martissant. Even if they have money, they have a very hard time to find anything to rent in Port-au-Prince because the problem has metastasized also in the whole city. It's pretty much not even the so-called, posh neighborhoods like Paco or Toujours are spared by the violence and the kidnappings right now. Unless you live in maybe Pétionville, it's maybe more safe, but even there, I think that Pays-Loc started in 2019, but it's still the same paralysis that we have. So in Martissant, there's not much that can be done, unfortunately. And that's really worrying because that's where most of the clean water for Port-au-Prince is coming from. Those springs need to be preserved. Those ravines need to be cleaned pretty much all the time.
Thank you, Vincent. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for presenting everyone. I learned some stuff from everyone. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me? This is Professor Pierre. I have a question.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I want to thank the presenters who highlighted the importance of building social capital in these communities. So my question is for Miss Gloria. Can you tell me what ecosystem service is and what do you mean by community capital weight? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, Professor Natalie. So what I mean by ecosystem services is like our environment provides us with numerous services, whether it's tangible or intangible ones, right? But specific to agroforestry, which trees, different species of trees have different usages. Some specifically help fix nitrogen, which helps the actual soil quality to help with crops. And, so the idea is that there are various tangible and intangible benefits that our environment provides. And when it comes to trees can provide, the tangible could be actual shade, fruits, and protection from like the rain and winds. The intangible, I guess I could say shade is intangible, and the greenery around us. I don't know for anyone else, but seeing greenery just makes me happy. Fresh air is a tangible one too, but seeing greenery, like for example in Martissant, right, that urban forest section, I'm pretty sure people that live around there are probably happier because they have happier being defined differently there because of the context there. But the greenery just provides a better sense of living or quality of life. Just being able to go to a tree, touch it, and have, you know, actual product in your hand. And as for the actual, you mentioned, what was the second part of your question? I'm so sorry, Natalie.
Community capital weight. What does that mean?
Yes. So for the methods that we use, the community capital framework, it's a way to kind of measure livelihoods by dividing each dimension of livelihood by a certain capital. So social capital is one, human, natural, and all that stuff. So the idea with our methodology was we used a software where we coded every single excerpt that related to each capital. So let's use social capital as the actual example. If someone said, we live here as a group, we do everything together, I trust everyone here, right? We would assign that a weight of like 3. If someone said, yeah, we're cool here, but everyone does their thing, but we're cool here, that would be like an average, like I would define it like an average, like a number 2. So on a scale of 1 to 3, 3 being like very positive, 2 being average, and an example of a 1 excerpt, I guess an excerpt with a value for the weight as 1, that would be like, we don't do anything together here. I don't trust people here. So applying weights just allows us to kind of like track actual patterns and trends and how people are describing things. So for this particular study, we applied weights to capitals based on whether it was positive, average experience, or negative experiences. So it's a way to kind of like, yeah, just pretty much visualize, but also calculate positivity, negativity, and average conditions. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes, the chart that you put up makes much more sense now. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for the question.
I don't know if you have time for questions. I have many questions for Gloria and Karen and Stanley, but Karen and Stanley, I was curious. I found the project really fascinating and great. It makes me think about an international COMBIT or international LACU. But along those lines, I was wondering what is the place of state institutions and local institutions. I know that since Jovenel Moïse, we don't have much of rural administration, but I was wondering if there were ties between a project and a state or local administrations and how it worked.
Stanley, vous voulez répondre? Well, none, 0 that I know of. And Stanley, do you want to respond?
Yeah, exactement, Karine. Merci pour question. Et travail ça, yo, étape faite dans la localité. Et sinon, c'est mon localité a me changé. Première fois, je me parlé ensemble avec Dr. Karine pour lui te poser même question. Porte la li ouvri et pour support cap soutenir porte côté, mais dans moment kounya c'est monde qui dans localité yo et monde t'a exécuter mouvement ça avec nous même t'a vivre dans communauté diaspora yo partout dans le monde là et t'a bail donation chaque jour m'ba les donations moi me dit monde t'a investi et c'est comme ça tout projet ça yo nous arriver réaliser yo dans la localité nous pas gain aucun tie ensemble avec gouvernement aucun support du gouvernement dans moment actuel.
Mais si gouvernement est capable d'impliquer, qui ça ou capable besoin?
Je dis
si vous avez une possibilité de...
Oh, il y a un pile, je pense qu'il y a un pile, j'aime te dire dans le commencement, porte la li ouvri, mais je dis parce que un pile équipement n'a pas utilisé, équipement ça y a coûté organisation l'argent, spécialement les travail dans route nous louons par jour et yo coûté organisation comme ça nous avons investi dans l'autre bagaille dans l'organisation mais si nous avons un support gouvernement moi te quoi je dis à projet à l'état plus loin et porte la li ouvrir et puis pour monsieur Sayo pour gouvernement qui tant des projets ça pour connaître exactement qui ça n'a fait dans la localité et puis pour monsieur Sayo qui mettre main et puis projet ça qui avancer pour plus loin.
Okay. Merci en pile.
Pas de quoi.
And that's very typical of, the studies done by Francois Pierre-Louis and the group that was based at Georgetown. There's very little, if any, cooperation. And look, all those fees that Zone Pomme Claire paid, they didn't get any breaks. Wouldn't it be great if the state could, facilitate those shipments of the products and lowering the transfer fees, et cetera. I would just add one more thing is when you think of, just this incredible tête ensemble that has been done in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been raised in just 2 years, and what these folks have accomplished, and it's really pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing.
All right. I would like to thank all the panelists, Karen, Gloria, Vincent. I really appreciate you guys. You guys did fantastic. You too, Stanley. I'm going to end it now. Everyone take care. Have a good one.
Thank you, Irvin. Thank you for taking care of us and helping us get in and managing.
I tried.